Hello lovelies, I'm terrible at pimping my stuff, so here I am, pimping my stuff. Please like, subscribe, and most important of all, share, so that people can discover me and all the wonders that I offer. Horror. I often compare it to comedy. That's been a recurrent theme this week, plus the idea of horror as being transgressive, as an outlet for the dark, shadowy side of our personalities. And that's under threat from these culture wars, and it's not any one particular side here. In this culture war, which I'm going to arbitrarily say really began to kick off around 2010, so almost for the past decade, so hopefully we're coming out of it finally, there has been this fight, and the problem has primarily come from broadly the political left, the conservative left. That sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. And it's when that kind of collective idea, which is efficient and good in a lot of ways, but it's when that collective idea overreaches and becomes about protecting people from problems real and unfortunately also imagined. That's when we find the left being regressive and authoritarian rather than its more traditional position, which is anti-hierarchical, anti-authoritarian, more libertine, more about giving people rights than taking them away, about protecting people from real dangers rather than imagined dangers. And perhaps it's a measure of how good generally our societies are, that the focus has sharpened upon things that are, broadly speaking, irrelevant and don't actually hurt anyone. But we can never let our guard down against the right either, the conservative right, I guess, the authoritarian right, because historically it's been more them with their ties to tradition and religion and so on that have cracked down. Now I'm old enough to remember the right being the main cause of these problems, and what it was like in the kind of ramp up to that, how they've reacted to new technologies and ideas and modes and forms of expression, and it hasn't been good. I mean, in the 80s, the big thing was VCRs, right? Suddenly they were becoming affordable, suddenly everyone was having access to them, and bootleg tapes and films that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to see were sneaking past the BBFC and so on, and getting seen in an uncontrolled environment outside the theatres by people. And as a result, there was a panic about these video nasties, and a crackdown, and a harsher amount of censorship. I mean, and we all know what happened with D&D, and so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. And back in 2010, I was seeing the first sort of rumblings of this censorious period coming from the left, and it pains me to admit that they're a problem because I see myself as still being part of the left. But it was true. It turned out that this wokeness, this reincarnation of the hyper-PC period of the 90s, which was more solidly rebuffed by institutions back then, but it was taking hold. And so we've seen a lot of people getting censored, getting cancelled, getting unpersoned, tightening restrictions on platforms in much the same way, but much more speedily. As people reacted to VCRs, they're reacting to the internet and seeking censorship, and this has mostly come from the left. But just like in 2010, I was seeing the rumblings from the left approaching censorship and so on. I'm now seeing those same rumblings occurring from the right, and unfortunately a lot of people who believe very strongly in free expression, in the rights to express oneself, have a more libertine attitude, have ended up over this past decade aligning themselves with the right, because the right, many of them genuinely and sincerely, have been arguing for free expression, because it is their expression that has been under attack. Just as in the past, the left aligned itself with free expression because it was their expression, sexual, moral, anti-traditional, political, and so on, that was being controlled, and so they bucked against that. But we should never forget that this kind of censorious attitude, this puritanism, this desire to control everything can be found on both wings of the political spectrum. And increasingly I'm seeing that coming from the right. Things being decried as degenerate or as contributing to the downfall of the West. People's right to express their sexuality, their desires, the dark side of their personality is being increasingly suppressed. And the idea of simply demonstrating tolerance is being treated as part of the overreach of the left in other areas when it's not. There is no problem with drag queens doing story time. Right? There is no problem with gay pride parades. You just probably, if you're against that sort of thing, shouldn't take your kid there. Right? The trans panic. Alright, there are issues, there are unscientific ideas, there is nonsense, there are people like Jennifer Yaniv grifting off the back of this big push for trans rights, but these are human beings, they deserve rights, they deserve a basic level of respect that you're asking from them. But the panic is leading to a backlash. Not all change is progress. That's a lesson that both sides need to internalize, I think. It's possible to make things worse, and we should recognize that and act against it. So 3 things, I think, to bring this back onto topic. 3 things are bellwethers, are canaries in the coal mine for what will happen, what has happened in the past. When you see people complaining and trying to restrict access to pornography, when comedians aren't able to express themselves, and when horror writers and creators and filmmakers aren't able to express themselves, that's when you know you have a cultural problem. Pornography is traditionally the one everyone talks about, but I think we've missed, perhaps, in our concentration and our prurience, that these other things are also indicators. If a horror writer can't express themselves properly for commercial or social or other reasons, right, we have a problem, because this is meant to be our safe place to play in the dark, with ideas that are nasty, with horrible things that we reject. But there's a contradiction. There's death of the author, which means that we should disregard what the author intended and only consider the message received by certain people and their standpoint and their critical theory lenses and so on. But at the same time, they want to hold the author accountable for even what their villains do, what's presented in their books. The idea of exercising personal choice, not to consume things that upset and distress us, seems to have gone out the window. So there's a contradiction there. And the idea that people expressing their own sexuality consensually and with others and charging money for it, the idea that that's negative somehow is coming from both sides already. Comedians don't feel able to make jokes freely, to be hit or miss. There's no real opportunity for them to learn their craft, because mistakes that they made, real or imagined, will come back to haunt them. And horror is what I want to concentrate on here. There are a lot of assholes in the horror community. It's true, right? And there are people whose political and other opinions differ, but so what? What matters is the object, is the product, is the craft, is what comes out. And we have to grant artists and writers and comedians and even everyday people to have these outlets, whether by consuming or by creating. We have to allow people to play in the dark, to mock the sacred, to be profane. And we're not allowing that. And while I hope, though politics tends to lag behind culture, but I hope that the culture is shifting beyond the conservative authoritarian left now. But the right that has gotten a bit of a free pass, that a lot of people, including myself, have felt an increased kinship to, while they have been advocating for free expression, I now see them becoming a problem. And I can see that in the near future, the midterm, this is going to put me at odds with a lot of people who've come to appreciate my content. But I'm going to be at odds with them because I'm consistent, because I believe very strongly in the power of being able to express oneself. And I think that is going to slide away on the right, and it's going to carry a lot of people with it, unfortunately. The other side to all this is commercialism. Hopefully with the increasing success of R-rated movies, we'll see a return to form for horror. And with the accessibility of technology and filming techniques and so on, hopefully we'll see a renaissance in edgy, interesting, boundary-breaking, transgressive cinema as well. But look at the kind of horror that's big, that does well, that tends to be tamed down to a PG-13 rating. Look at the way China uses its financial influence to censor. This is another problem. So we're still caught in the mire of the long tail, the long cultural tail of left-wing conservatism, but we're seeing a ramping up in right-wing conservatism, and the effects that that's going to have going into the future, especially since they've learned tactics from the left. But we're also going to see this increased commercial censorship, and I invite those who are watching to join me in resisting these attempts to control speech, to control expression. Even if we don't like what's being expressed, people should have the right to say it. And that needs to be our moral compass here. That needs to be our lighthouse, our North Star. We need to focus on the right and ability of people to indulge in the dark, to make fun, and to do things that aren't commercial. I'll see you tomorrow for Halloween. Zang.
Sure, you could play one of those hoity-toity horror games where the most horrifying thing that happens is someone wearing a corset who really shouldn't. Or you could grind a zombie's face into a belt sander.